All right, hello everybody. Welcome to our webinar. This is our Q1 update in what's new with FarmQA. My name is Ben Munson. I'm a senior technology specialist with FarmQA, and I'll be walking you through some of our updates. So if you've been tracking, we did a quarterly update last Q4 of 2022. And with that, we covered a few things that were coming as far as some task functionality, which I touched on in that webinar. So if you want kind of the basics of that, you can go back and rewatch the previous updates, but we'll touch on what's new. And so with that, it's kind of some improvements and polishing up around our task functionality or workflow. And that's really about managing teams, who's doing what, dispatching, and we'll talk through that ability. We also updated around our zone creation tools, the ability to write a better prescription or give you more information while you're writing those variable rate prescriptions. So we'll touch on that. And then also we've got some additional functionality around yield inputs, how you enter that data, how you can upload files, which we'll touch on as well. Along with towards the end, if we have some time, I've got a few other, I would call smaller features that I can make everybody aware of as well as part of this conversation. So with that, we'll jump right into the product. But as a reminder, this is going to be posted into YouTube and our website. And so feel free to rewatch, maybe slow it down, share it with others on the team. So we're going to jump in. And as we do this, please feel free to ask questions within the website, within Teams in this case. And we will get to those at the end. And we will have plenty of time for questions. So with that being said, hopefully you can all see my screen. Let's see, make sure it's going. I think you've got it. So what we have here, this is controller. This is our web view or website where it's more of the brains of the product. And then we have the mobile application for data entry. And so the first topic we'll touch on today is around the task improvements that we've made. And so on the left-hand side, you see our work tab is available. And that is where you can view any kind of outstanding or already created work items or tickets. And so just at a high level, before I get too far into this, again, this is if you have a team of users within FarmQA. So let's say you're an agronomy firm or a co-op and you've got custom applicators, you've got scouts, soil samplers in FarmQA. This is the ability to create a task and assign it to them for a particular field, a particular task type, and a particular time window. And then that user can complete that on the mobile application. You can be managing and dispatching from this view as well. So with that, the previous webinar covered on the basics, but I'm going to get everybody back up to speed, fairly quick. So within the work tab, the task list view, this shows a holistic view of all the tasks that have been created within your account. And you can see all the raw data, if you will, with that. So task type, the organization or growers that the tickets are assigned to, the field names, priority, the status of that, if it's completed, in progress. We've got a few others as well as far as the states. And then the finish by date, who it's created by, finished by. So with that, you can split this data out or group it is probably a better term by priority. So what things have to be done. This is medium priority, high priority tasks in my account. And you can also filter this by who it's assigned to. So this is a quick view of kind of all that raw data, which you could select all, and then you can export this out to Excel. A scenario for that would be if you, let's say you bill based on your service and you want to see how many fields you soil sampled in the month of October. You could filter by your completed by date. So in here you can turn on and off columns within this grid. So we'll turn on our completed by date, for example. And then with that, so a lot of these aren't completed, you could say greater than 0. So you find all the tasks that are completed. You could export to Excel, and then you'd have a list of all the fields with the acres that you had sampled, which could then be turned into an invoice. So that is one example of this grid that's fairly practical. It's also where you can link over to, in this case, the scouting reports that were associated to the tasks. The other component of this is the daily task view. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time in walking through how you can use this. So this I touched on briefly on the last update webinar, but it's a different view for the same data. So each row in this case would be a user within your FarmQA account. And then as you create tasks, you'll be able to assign those to individual users within your FarmQA account. And then you can get this calendar view as an individual or as a manager, seeing who needs to do what each day. So what I'll do to showcase this, I'm going to go back into our field list view, and I'm going to grab a series of fields. So I'm going to group the list view by crop in this case. I'm going to grab, let's say 5. Well, let's first break this down by a grower. So we know that for Minnesota farms, we need to scout all 5 of these soybean fields by the end of the week. So I will select all 5 of those fields. Then I have my schedule task function. I'll select scout. Now, as part of one ticket, since they're all batched together, we can say they need to be completed by the end of the week. Assign this to an individual. So I'll assign them to myself, and we will call this, put a note in here called webinar example. Now you can put whatever you wanted in that text box, and it will transfer through to the person completing it or viewing the task. So at this point, I will save those tickets out. And if I click on the work tab on the left-hand side of my screen, you will see that those tasks got created, but a better way to see that would be within my view of the calendar. If you recall, I collapsed out all these other users just to simplify the view at this point. I assigned them to myself, and I said they need to be done on Friday. So those are all the tasks that I had just created in real time. From this view, you can click into a task and see the details. So in this case, I see when it needs to be completed. That's assigned to me. The instructions in this case would be from the creator of the ticket, but then I could add a note myself to say, couldn't make it, it rained, or something like that. And then you could save that out, or yeah, we'll save it out in this case, but then we'll perhaps move that into next week. So it's a pretty elegant way to reassign or update the dates is simply by dragging and dropping these tickets across time. And so with that, you can bump tickets out to different days. But in addition, if you see that for a particular day, a user has more work on their plate than they can handle, you can assign tasks across users by dragging in this calendar view as well, as far as who's doing what. So this is, again, it's a good kind of dispatching tool of somebody sitting more or less at the headquarters. They see all the tickets, and then they can assign to who can complete those tasks. Another scenario here that is very similar to what I just described, but I want to make sure it's evident, is let's say you created a series of tasks, maybe soil sample in this case, and I'm going to say, call this webinar example 2. What we can do in this case, since they're soil sampling tasks, we have some additional inputs as far as sample date. But again, we're going to say, maybe we'll bump this out a week and say it needs to get done on the 10th. What we can do is we can leave this unassigned, or there's no assignee. Then what happens is that it will see on this daily task view, all the tasks show up under the unassigned user. And so we'll jump into that week of the 10th, and there we can see all of the, actually, let me back it out for the full week. You can see all those sampling tasks need to be done on the 10th, but in this case, they're unassigned. So this is a good opportunity to say, work needs to be done, but you don't know who's going to do it. Create the task, but leave them as unassigned, and then we can do the drag and drop to assign those, but all from this list view, for example. So keep that in mind as far as the unassigned concept or category in here and how it can be used. So that some of that might be a review from last update webinar, but what is new is the mobile component to tasks. And so I probably mentioned this last time, but this is really how people are going to use those tasks. Is the controller or the website is more of the headquarters creating the tasks. Then from the mobile side, you can be viewing all the tasks assigned to an individual. You can, as a manager, you can create new tasks from the mobile app. So that's the green plus button, choose your task category and create a task. But what I want to point out here, so again, basics work tab would be new. Then from here, a couple things to keep in mind. You can still filter your task by an individual grower or a subdivision of your operation. But then within here, you could search. So let's say I was going to just look for task on field 115. Now I can see everything I need to do there. A couple other options is we could search webinar and we'd see the field that I need to do or complete as part of this particular webinar. But a couple other things that can be done is, let's say you are the manager, you'd have the option to view all items. And a reason you may want to do this is, let's say I'm viewing all items and I select a particular task. I can see that this is assigned to, so these are the details of the ticket, an ID, the work category. So this is a chemical application that needs to be done, who it's created by, me in this case, and who it's assigned to. The reason you might want to view all tickets is that you can reassign as a manager or as a dispatcher, you can change who that's assigned to. And so from this view, let's say we are viewing these tickets, then you can change, let's say driver A is going to be sick, you could redispatch from this side. So that is the kind of experience from the mobile app. What we'll do at this point is show a couple additional filters. And so over here, there's the finish by is the default sort, or yeah, sort category. If I tap on that green text, this will bring up some additional options. And so as a user, as an individual, I could say, sort this by task type. So now here's all my chemical application task, which you can tell by the icon, followed by kind of unknown or custom category, followed by scouting, etc. So that's one option. The others would be by priority, low, medium, high, who it's assigned to, and by distance. So let's say I'm a custom applicator. I could assign this and see which fields are closest to me at the top and furthest away at the bottom, so I could be efficient with my time while I'm doing these tickets or sprays. Now, within the mobile side, a key component here is that you can view a ticket. In this case, this is a scouting task assigned to myself. I can use this green arrow button, which would allow me to navigate to the field, or it pulls me into the field that needs to be scouted. At this point, I could use our built-in navigation over here with this circle, or I could simply scout the field. And then as I submitted this report, it would complete the ticket, and I'd have the opportunity to create a follow-up tasks with a number of days to say, I want to come back to this field on the 7th, and then I could leave a note, say, check wild oats in southwest corner. So at that point, I could submit that task, and it would close out the ticket, and we can move on to the next field in that same way. So the whole task set on mobile is now kind of available to play with, and that is see tasks, create tasks, complete tasks, and that's really how we see this being best utilized. The other component to tasks is the color by task mode. And so what this is, on the map view, you can see our default coloring is by crop. If you're a current user, you're familiar with that. We have some additional color options, which you'll see up here: field color, color by crop being the default, color by variety is an option, color by farm. These have been in existence for a while, but the color by task is new. And then if we get into this particular setting, now you can see our legend updates to show you which fields have been completed, which ones have been pending. You can interact on this left-hand side. So right now, these are showing my scouting tasks. Green's been fields that have been scouted, and yellow's been the fields that have not been at this point. You can choose which of those, the statuses you want to have available on the map. So you could say, well, I just want to see anything that's pending and completed, or if I pull it out, here's just the completed fields, or vice versa, just the pending fields that need to be scouted. So that's one view, but then you can also toggle between your tasks. So now as an operator, you can flip into your chemical applications and you see, okay, there's the fields we need to spray. And again, the different statuses on that as well. So that is a view that we think will be very valuable for users, just to see things more spatially. And then as far as dispatching, can more efficiently assign who needs to do what based on kind of the clustering or the spacing between those fields. So that's component as part of the system as well, that is a component to tasks. So with that, tasks is something that if you want to play with it, it is an add-on functionality within FarmQA. You can reach out to me directly if you want a free demo access to it to evaluate if it's worthwhile for you. But please reach out, give us feedback on what you'd like to see on the task side or work, but also put your comments in Teams and we'll address those at the end. So moving on to our next topic. So we added some additional functionality around our zone creation tools and prescription writers. Right now, we recognize that we have a kind of a lighter version of the zone creation tools versus other systems out there, and that's something that's kind of how we see ourselves in the industry. But what I'll showcase is that in previous webinars, I showed how you can create zones, you can write prescriptions, but we've added some additional functionality around the prescriptions to give people the information they need to determine, let's say, application rates. So to illustrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to jump into a demo account that has some soil data, and this whole flow may be new to some of you, so I'll walk through the full process of how you can create zones and then the prescription writing side of things. So what I will show is on this particular account, I've got a field where I have drop pins, uploaded lab results, and in this case, you can see if I tap on each individual pin, you can view the lab results, and then you can also get that data rolled up across or averaged across the field. So that's kind of existing functionality, but what I'll show is we'll jump into the soil tab, which has been revamped since the 2022 season. But what I'll do is I'll click on this points field, which is the same field we just viewed. In our soil tab, we've got, or in this new soil view, you've got a grid of all the data where you can see that the sample IDs, the depth you collected, the lab results by location. But what we'll show in this particular case is how you can create the zones based on this grid of data. So the little black circle up here is how you can enter into zone creation mode. And let's say I'm going to call this webinar zone example. Now, a couple things that you can add, you can put a description, so you could say VR nitrogen. Now, on the right-hand side, we've got the ability now to show your actual lab results by pin. And what we're currently showing is by the selected attribute. So right now it's BS calcium percentage, parts per million. But let's say I wanted to generate my zones based on organic matter or phosphorus. So from here, you could pick your nutrient levels, the numbers or the values update on the app or on the web. And so you can toggle between those. In this case, I'll stick with the organic matter, like I mentioned. One thing to keep in mind is that you can opt points in and out. So let's say as we're looking at these values, you notice one that you feel is an outlier. What you can do within FarmQA is on the right-hand side, this panel over here, you can kind of unlock the ability to manipulate these points. And so now if I uncheck field point 42 and maybe point 48, and I commit those, now I can see those points get removed, and I could create my zones with removing those outliers. So that is an ability within the system. Now moving back over to the left-hand side, we'll choose to show labels. The clustering algorithm is how we're going to break this data down. So in this case, I'll show you equal interval. What I'll do is I'll put a minimum zone size of, I don't want any zones less than 2 acres, and I want a 5-zone setup with a red to green color palette. So I'll now preview that on organic matter. So we see those breakpoints. As we scroll down, the left-hand view shows us what those organic matter values were that broke the zones. So between zone 1 and zone 2, the cutoff was 3.82%. But what we can, so that's how you can view kind of how this clustering algorithm worked. But what I'll do instead, so that was equal interval, and you can kind of read the description of how it breaks that data apart. But you can also use this quantiles, which more so equally distributes the values. In the previous one, you saw some zones that had very little data, but now it splits the data into more equal represented areas by, or zones by area. So regardless, you can kind of choose that method. Now, what I wanted to point out is we've added in the ability to when you write your prescription, you can put in your attributes. So let's say this is variable rate nitrogen. You can choose your type. So if it's just you want it to be a text attribute or numeric, numeric is by far the most common. You could put precision. So if you're doing something very granular, you could put in a number of precision units of more or less significant digits you want to have with those outputs. Now, this is what I want to show. So within this view, we've got the ability where you can now see the zone colors, the zones. We've added in where you can actually see the ranges. So before we had a very kind of rudimentary view for prescription writing. Now you can actually see those nutrient ranges. You can see the amount of acres and percent of the total field that represents per zone. Now for the actual values, you can put in, let's say your minimum application, you want to have 100 pounds per acre and the max is 400. And then what you can do with that is you can click this fill button, this autofill, and that will evenly split the values across those zones based on your min and max rates that you're wanting to apply. With that, you can still adjust. So even though we autofill, you can take one particular zone up to 175 or 275 in this case. Now, I also want to point out that we're showing the total acres being applied, your average rate. So across all zones, your average rate was 255, and then the sum or the total of all products. And so this is the 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre being applied multiplied by your acres to get the total per zone, along with the total across the entire field. So at this point, you can download that as a shapefile, upload it into an applicator or into a controller. So that functionality was available in the last webinar, but we provided more data here based on feedback that we heard to help you guys choose the right values or write those prescriptions in this fashion. So that's available. And just to recap, so you can create zones based on imagery, based on soil data, based on uploaded yield results. And so those are kind of the three methods right now. You can't combine those at this point, but you can use kind of a single data point like I was showing with the soil scenario. So that's what's new on the prescription writer. What I'll show next is we added in a new view around the crop rotations. So if I come back into my other account, what I will show here is our rotation view. So I've tapped on fields on the top left, and now I'm going to jump into crop rotation. From this particular view, we've got the ability to grab a year and drop it into the column header, and that will actually group this data by, in this case, 2023. So this is probably a refresher, but now you can see the rotational history, in this case, over the last series of years. What I'm going to do is I'll pull out a couple of years and say I only want to look at the last 4 or 5 years. So I'll pull out a couple of those from my view, and now I just have 2020 through 2023. So far that's the same as what you're used to. What I wanted to point out is now if you tap on any one of these cells, we give you the history in that field on the right-hand side. So our goal is, this is kind of our first step towards more of a true crop plan within this view, where you can see all the relevant information across years to help you make a decision about what you're going to do in the future year, say 2023 or 2024. So right now what we're showing is your yield by season. And so on the right-hand side, you can see in 2019, this was a sugar beet field, and it yielded 21 tons. It benchmarks that across other beet fields for that season, meaning that the minimum was 15 and the max was 36 tons. Same thing going across years, kind of in general how that field yielded. And you can see across all crops, this field was on kind of the medium or the low end of the medium range for the benchmark scenario. Then at the top, you can see the application history. So this allows you to look at, let's say, a couple things. Maybe you're looking at resistance issues. You can look at your mode of action groups across the seasons. And then you can see, well, you used group 2s across every year, a lot of group 3s. And then these are actually product totals across the year. And so that allows you, again, look at for rotational concerns around the chemistry you're using, or it's just giving you roll-up product totals so that you can easily say, we want to use the same chemical package or the same program we used in 2022 or 2021 and have that easily available with totals. We plan to kind of beef up this view and add more to it, but this is kind of a starting point of adding some additional information in besides just the crops and varieties when it comes to this year-over-year comparison. While we're here, I'll also point out, I'll pull out one additional year and just get a 3-year rotation view. One thing that has been added as well based on request is that before you could export this to Excel. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like. So the scenario here is if you're creating a crop plan, you can spit out the area total per crop, and you can also do that by variety. So you know how many acres are going into each variety. And you do that, in this case, through the show variety mode. So I can flip into show varieties here, group this by 2023, and now you can see all of how many acres are going into this particular variety. But what I was going to show that's new is we can manipulate this view to have the columns that we're interested in. So let's say this organization might not be interesting to me, so I can pull that out of the view. So I just have field names, acres, crops. But instead of just Excel, we now have the PDF option as well. So if I tap on that, we just got this in recently where it's going to show you a PDF of that output besides just Excel. And so that's now an option from the rotation view. We'll also, so the next thing that we'll talk about, we just showed the yield information across years. And so that's kind of showing you the value of once you enter yield data, what you can do with it. But I'll actually take a step back and show you how you can enter that yield information currently, and then an additional analytics view of comparing that across all fields. So what we can do is either on the mobile side or on the web, we can enter a harvest date. So what I'll do is I'll show it first from the list view, but we'll also do it from the mobile side and then an individual field. So in my case, I've got fields that, here's a good example where these don't have these do have a harvest event. Let me go back into here you go. So here's a series of 3 fields that do not have a harvest date. There's no yield data in here. So I can multi-select fields, and within my action pane across the top, I can set a harvest date. And so let's say I harvested these cornfields in the middle of October. I can now input a yield value per field, and that's going to be tracked in FarmQA. So you can set up what your default yield unit is. You can choose as well. So if you want to override from what it's currently defaulted to, you can do that. We have different unit systems for regions, and we could add additional units if what you want to collect in is not listed. So now if I save this out, we're going to see these fields populate with a harvest date, but then a yield amount. So within here, what we can do is you can see the yield amount per field, and this is a per acre yield, and then we'll multiply that out by the field size, so you can get more or less total bushels across that field. And so in this scenario, what I'll do is I'll search this by corn, and now I can see maybe you just want a yield summary output for a customer. So you can select that you want the field name, the crop variety, acres, and then you just care about the yield data in here. So now this is a restricted view or restricted grid that just shows you the yield for corn across all their fields. You could then sort this to say, here's your lowest yielding field, here's your highest yielding field. And so with that, you could then spit this into Excel as well. And so if you wanted to get, let's say, total bushels, you could do this in Excel to say sum up across those fields, and there's your total bushels in corn for a scenario. So the other way to go about doing this, there's really 2 ways that I'll show, is from the list view, or sorry, we're just on the list view, from the main map view. So coming back to the map tab on the top left, I'm going to code this by crop again. If I now zoom in and let's say I pick on a particular field here, I can now click this harvest icon in the top left, and in the same fashion as before, put in a harvest date along with a yield amount, and then that would be tracked. This is a good way to do it field by field by just tapping on it from the map. And then real briefly on the mobile side, if we zoom in, click on a field, you can now, under this dot, the 3 vertical dots on the right-hand side, you can put in your set harvest date, and then you'd have your yield amount input there as well. Once that's done, so let's say we set that data within, just a refresher on the mobile side, within a field view, you can click on this eye icon on the top, and we will now show you your yield amount within this view. So a scenario is you can have historic seasons available or viewable on the app, and then you could view the harvest data or the average yield amounts on those fields from the app. So that's one way to do it. The other option here is you can also sort your fields by your harvest date or your harvest amount. So what I did here is back on the list view, I have this text where it's going to sort. Right now it defaults to sorting by name. I'm going to tap on that green text right here, and that pulls up some additional sort options for which I'm going to sort by harvest amount. And now you can see here's all my flax fields and their yields. Here's all my soybean fields. And so this can actually just be used at a glance if you're talking with a grower or you're just curious yourself what were your best producing fields. From the app, you can get into this comparative view by seeing the fields listed out by yield amounts. So that's kind of a handy feature. Now, the last thing I'll show, we're going to go back into the web view. This time I'm going to click on analytics. And this is somewhat similar to the field list view, but there's a little bit more control in how you view this data. So what I've done so far is I'm in analytics. I'm within my 2022 growing season, but now I've got a saved view. So up here you can save different, think of these as tabs in an Excel file of what data you want to display. So I have a quick saved view for my yields. Once I tap on that, I've got a row per field. I've got this grouped or sectioned out by crop. But one of the things I wanted to point out here is now you can compare your yield data versus anything else you have in FarmQA. So in this case, I've got my season GDUs, my season precip data, all side by side or compared to my yield values. So I can see that this field yielded 260 in this case, but the GDUs and how the precip stacked up. So that's the ability to view yield data, but also compare it to anything else in your quote unquote FarmQA database. And what I'll show here as well, one last thing is that from this view, we will also average it across the fields. And so like in the list view, you could see what your best fields were, what your worst fields are. But in this scenario, you can actually more easily benchmark in the sense that you know this field yielded 195 bushels per acre, but the average across all those fields was 215. So that's another view that's available from the analytics side as well. So that's new, and I'll kind of tease this out for the next webinar. We're adding the ability to upload yield maps themselves, and then as part of that, you'd be able to visualize the yield data in a clean layer within FarmQA. But we'd also be harvesting out the min, average, max yields for a field. And so we could actually, instead of just manually entering in the values, we could look at the attribute table of a yield file, and we'd be able to pull those values out ourselves and push them into analytics for comparisons, along with a map layer where you could view the yield maps in FarmQA. So we are very close to that feature. I just don't have a good data set, and there's a few polishing things that we're putting around that. So stay tuned there, but that is where we can then in the future pull yield values from. And then with our whole analytics tool, if you've played with it some, this is where anything, whether it's scouting data, it's soil data, it's weather information, you put into FarmQA and you can compare it. Well, previous to this, we were kind of missing the yield value in the sense that that's where you kind of evaluate or how you weight what did better or worse. Now you have that for comparisons of for diagnosing what may have gone wrong or went well. So that is a big part of what we've got so far on the yield stuff, and more to come there. So at this point, we'll just want to do a refresher. We did add this new soil tab. I touched on it before, but one thing that I wanted to note and I missed when I talked about it before, from this view, we have the ability to see this data, but similar to the crop rotation view, we're also servicing up the previous yields across seasons, along with, the applications versus the yield data. And then you can also see your trend level information here across your field. So you can look at nutrient levels over time in this particular view. And then this is also where you do your imports. You can create pins as far as defining where to collect, do things like that here. So those are kind of some major components. We do have we added in some additional field export options. So this is kind of getting into the everything else category of the webinar. But what I wanted to point out is, let's say you're on the list view and you've got the need to export out boundaries. You can now multi-select and then export out to a shapefile. And so before, this had to happen by an entire folder where you could say, I want all the fields for Minnesota farms. We can still do that, but you have more granularity. So now you can say, I just want these 4 fields exported into one shapefile. You could multi-select and click export. Then you would have those files available for just those fields. The other thing, we talked about zones and we talked about prescriptions. So one thing to point out here is that within, like in this account, within an account, you can view all of your previously written prescriptions. And so this is a place where you can go and reference that. For example, if you wrote a prescription and you sent it to the grower said I never got it, and for whatever reason you need to re-access that, here's a list of all of my previously written recommendations, prescriptions, which I could then download to a shapefile, and I'd have access to again to re-upload or resend out to a customer. So that is a big part of the view. I think I may have talked about this last time, but with our pick list options in the scouting template, we added the ability to multi-select. So I'll quickly touch on that as well. Within the scouting tab and templates, let's say we come into a particular template and we have our growth stages. Within here, a new option is you can allow multiple selections. So turning that on. Now, what that really looks like on the mobile side, let's go into a cornfield and we start our scouting event. Within our growth stage question, before you could only choose a single value, now you can multi-select. So you could say, you saw a range, this field is kind of varying from silk to V10. So you could multi-select, and that's going to show up on the PDF as that multi-selection as well. So with that, I know we're running a little long on the half hour. So I think we're going to open up to questions now. Like I said, I'll just tease out for the next webinar. We'll talk more about the yield data, and we've got a few interesting things here coming for the season that we'll continue to keep you updated on. But for now, if you can put your questions in that Teams chat, and then I will address those. If you don't have questions and you want to drop off, appreciate the time. And like I said, this video will be recorded and you could rewatch it. So thanks again. I'll look for the questions.